ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome a very, very special poet, a poet whose reputation is global, who's known for his thoughtful, very spiritually driven work. He speaks to the human spirit, he speaks to the human condition, and so much includes in that thinking about humans in their lives. He also brings a very, very much a spiritually centered focus on that. So I am greatly honored, sir, to bring to you Mr. Kingsley Hutchinson, or sometimes called Manatita Hutchinson, and also known most reverently as Lantern Carrier. Ladies and gentlemen, Lantern Carrier. Welcome, sir.
You've done your homework.
Well, sir, I try to be a good student.
Thank you.
You can appreciate that.
Thank you.
First thing I want to ask, go ahead.
You're not the ear to you. Sorry.
Okay, so the first thing I want to ask is, some poets start when they're very young, dibbling and dabbling, writing, drawing, painting, whatever, and some start later. I won't guess because I think you're too grand a spirit to try to put in any kind of box. So let me ask you, sir, did you start writing early? Were you captured by literature early?
Very early. In fact, English is still up to this day my very best subject at school. We all have a best subject. And I was born in Grenada, the West Indies, and at the age of 4, in the earlier hours of the Caribbean sunshine, I'll be within a lamppost just reading and reading and reading. And obviously, my native tongue, and my only tongue, although I dabble in Spanish, my only tongue is English. So I was interested in people like Shakespeare and Keats and, those kind of poets and writers like Charles Dickens and so forth. So very, very early. But by the time I was 11 years old, essentially I was finished reading, including science fiction, Mills and Boons, autobiographies, westerns, you name it.
That's always so interesting. I have one of the things that really caused me to do this interview show more than anything else is, as wonderful as it is hearing a poet read their own work, which is paramount to me. But I'm also so intrigued by where these poets come from. What brought this world and what brought these poets to share their work. So another thing I want to ask you is, now, those of us who were captured by language early, some of us really worked in that, did our reading, did our early writing, but some also had other arts. Did you have some other arts? Were you also an illustrator, a drawer, a painter, a musician? Did you have another art form when you were young?
I dabbled in art. I was a policeman, and I dabbled in art very briefly
Wow.
while I was in police force. I took a course in England from a college called Bennett College, Aldermaston. They've now disappeared. But I did it maybe about 3, 4, 5 months, and then for whatever reason, I didn't follow it up. So I wouldn't call myself an artist in that sense because I did very, very little. I could hardly draw. But my art form was essentially poetry, short story writing, science fiction, and that kind of thing. And of course, my teacher describes life itself as an art. So, my thing was self-giving in a big way. And so that was like an art to me, being openly extrovert, friendly with people, encouraging, offering solace. I was unconsciously moving towards the light. I followed the evangelist everywhere as a child. And my mother gave me freedom. I mentioned that in my book. I had a lot of freedom. My mother was a kind of self-caring, self-giving, very, very selfless woman, but she wasn't strict. My aunt was strict. Oh, where are you going? And always quick to get the scrap, but my mother was different. So that autonomy, that freedom helped me a lot.
I am intrigued. You mentioned you were briefly policeman, a peace officer. I'm
Yes.
intrigued by that. I think what a marvelous transition, what you must have brought as a person of your temperament, a person of your clear, philosophical drive, a caring person. What took you to work in law enforcement briefly? So many times we hear about officers whose motivation is something less than ideal. Talk a little bit about what led you to be a policeman briefly.
Well, my father was a policeman before me. So
Ah,
he was the kind of like a beacon of light, and I kind of followed him into it. I spent 6 months in a police training center, and I did everything I needed to do. In fact, I came out second in law, British law, and they wanted me to go to the CID, but you can't really change the human heart, or you could call it the spiritual heart. I was inwardly good by nature, and I knew there were some aspects of the force which was difficult. So I didn't want to go to CID. I just chose to be an ordinary uh, beat patrol. Someone is on the streets, sort of thing. I did it for about 6 months, and afterwards, I worked at the Commissioner of Police's headquarters doing filing, stenography, and things like that. And then I worked in what we call outstations. You sit behind the desk in a diary, and people coming with their complaints, and you man the telephones and you write down statements. That's like an easy thing because on the street, I was essentially a very good and very kind person. But the police is like any organization, they need results. If you're there for 3 years and you don't have an arrest, they begin to wonder.
I've heard that sort of matter before.
Yeah.
Well, I think it speaks to your character that you wanted to try to contribute in that way as well.
Yes.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about, you are, I'm going to say, among poets who are by lot a philosophical bunch. You
Yes.
stand out, my brother. You stand out as a man of great depth, a man of spiritual learning and study.
Thank you. Thank you. I
Talk a
have
little bit
read
about,
the mystics, it has to be said. Hafiz, Rumi, Rabia, the English poet Blake, Wordsworth, Emerson, Dickinson, Americans, Whitman. So I have been schooled in some of the poets, but my style is uniquely my own. Some of it taken from the mystics and some taken from my own teacher.
now, you also, should we say, studied in one of the transcendental schools. You speak occasionally of your teacher, of your guru. Could you talk a
Yes.
little bit about that? How did you kind of, what intrigued you about spiritual study that led you to spend time learning about, should we say, really spiritual matters?
I think I had an innate yearning for the truth most of my life. After I became spiritual. I realized that I was spiritual in a former life. We believe in reincarnation. And I think I came to this life as a continuation from what I was before. I didn't know it then, but it is that which drew me to order the book in America from there was a master that came in America quite early called Yogananda,
Uh-huh.
and he had a disciple called Donald Walters, whose spiritual name was Swami Kriyananda. And Kriyananda wrote a book called The Path, Autobiography of a Western Yogi. That was the first book I found. But I'm mentioning it because to answer your question is tricky because I don't even know why I ordered it. But there was that kind of innate instinct. I went to a spa. I wasn't feeling very well. I stayed 2 weeks in the spa. I did a process of fasting and other things. And it was while there listening to lectures and taking part in nice juices and such as what you're drinking now and water and cleansing that I discovered the magazine which had this uh, advert basically of the book. And I was sitting at home one day, I was already a nurse, I had 2 days off, and something just came through the door. and I picked it up, and it was called The Path Autobiography of Western Yogi. I'd forgotten everything about it, but I started reading, and then I had a series of spiritual experiences. I simply could not put it down. For the next 2 days, I was reading that book, and my whole life changed. Yogananda, his master, wrote a book called Autobiography of a Yogi. It's a
I'm
spiritual
familiar with it,
guide, but a
yes.
very different book. If I had read that book first, I doubt he would have had such a profound effect on me, because I was very Christian based. And Kriyananda drew a lot of parallels between the scripture of the East and the scripture of the West. He was trying to bring them in harmony. He wasn't what do you call them? Diversive, whatever. He wasn't a separatist kind of figure. He was all about harmony and oneness. And I picked that up quickly. But it was he who introduced me to the laws of karma, the doctrines of reincarnations and other things. And somehow something in me just started falling into place. It's like I was in a strange zone. Everything was just falling into place, falling into place. And I was totally transformed. It's, I describe it like what Christ speak about being born again, being born into the spirit of spirit. You don't necessarily have to go to your river and be sprinkled with water. It can happen anywhere. You can hear someone talking on TV and it just clicks. But in my case, it was through reading a book. And a week later, I found two other books, one called Meditation, Paths to Tranquility, and the Bhagavad Gita as it is by His Divine Grace, Swami Prabhupada, A.C. Bhaktivedanta. And I remembered straight away that Kriyananda mentioned those two books, so I bought them and I started reading again. And one of them had a paragraph on the path of love, devotion, and surrender by Sri Chinmoy and a telephone number. They were close to me, and I rang them up and I went. But part of your question dealt with what pushed me, and what really pushed me is when I started reading Sri Chinmoy's books, he spoke with a kind of purity and authority that I had not experienced before. Like, this man really knows what he's talking about, his own inner experiences. And that is what drew me to his path. But as to the path itself, I became conscious through reading Kriyananda's book.
Yeah, I had a good friend that spent a lot of time with Sri Chinmoy and found it very, very valuable, let's say.
Oh, very
My
nice.
path was quite different, brother, and sometime we'll have to talk about that. But I'm also very interested. And you mentioned in passing that you had also spent some time as a nurse. What kind of nursing, what kind of medical work did you do?
I started in the general hospital. So we call it RGN. In America, it's called an RN, registered general nurse. And then I branched off, I did a postgraduate in RMN. I don't think they do that in America. America, probably it's included in your state registered training, just 3 months or so. In England, we do them both separate. So I spent a lot of time in a psychiatric hospital. I did psychiatric courses. I studied Jung and Freud and those people as well, and other things. And I got another certificate, which we call an RMN, Registered Mental Nursing. I worked in a registered mental hospital until 1985. I was what you might call a sister or a charge nurse in America, someone in charge. And then I joined Sri Chinmoy's path in 1982. So I had began leading towards the spiritual life. So I moved away from psychiatry. I was too sensitive. And when you're dealing with those kind of patients, it affects you. So I left, but I didn't go back to general. I went straight to work with some people who were running a shoe shop, and they were disciples of Sri Chinmoy. I joined them and I worked with them for 9 years, just selling shoes and clothing. So I did that for 9 years.
I want to ask you to reflect on something for me. In many spiritual traditions, people with what we call typically in the West, we frame as mental disorders. In a lot of spiritual traditions, those people are seen not as troubled, but more as, should we say, touched.
Yes.
They have an insight. They have, because they live outside the normal mind, they're viewed with some appreciation. Since you were involved in spiritual study while you were doing this mental health work, what was your take on that? Um, I know from some time I spent with some people who had mental issues. Um, Sometimes their insights are really remarkable.
Some of them have a deeper spirituality. Not all of them, but many have come with a deeper spirituality. But obviously, there can be a disorder of consciousness, and some of them clearly had a disorder of consciousness. My teacher used to say he could see them and he could see what the problem was straight away, and it said they were not difficult to put right. And some of them were young children, too. He says he can see it even in children. But for whatever reason, it went that way. And Trichim was one of those who tended not to interfere if it wasn't what he called God's will. He would leave it alone. Yeah, because some people were meant to be it for their own reason, but some of the people I saw came there because of, you can call it carelessness, people who just smoked a little too much. A lot of them came because of dope. We call it dope, but some didn't have that experience. They just came. The harsher problems were related to schizophrenia, which is, it's like saying something is a felony and another thing is a misdemeanor. A depression would be like a misdemeanor, and a schizophrenia would be like a felony in legal terms. And there are four forms of schizophrenia. It's a much more severe form of illnesses. And many patients stopped taking their drugs and tried coming of it. But in my experience, they would relapse if they were meant to have it within 6 months. There have been people like Linus Pauling and others who've done studies with nutrition, particularly vitamin C, which has helped some people. Some people flip because of poor eating habits, nutritional habits. But others, for whatever reason, have a genetic disposition to the problem. And I suppose that has to be looked up in terms of karma. The more modern psychologists and doctors have a humane approach, but even they realize that taking people off the drugs completely is not necessarily the answer, because you have a lot of cases of what we call relapse. And then they brought in by the police in straitjackets, and initially the fighting and banging their head against walls, and even their family get fed up with it. So some people fall into that category. Yes, some can be helped. Yes, nutrition is helpful. But yes, some people, in my experience, has to be the experiences they're having.
Okay, let me ask you this. You clearly are a person who has undertaken work to help people. I think that's clear from your trajectory.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, let's set spirituality aside for a second and its responsibilities. We know what those can be. But let me ask you, as a poet, as a thinker, as a philosopher,
Mhm.
what responsibility does that person, that poet, that philosopher have to the society at large?
I've described it literally in 2 lines, basically. I think of myself as a servant. I suppose I got that from Sri Chinmoy. I've got to the point you're saying, take it away from spirituality, but I cannot really, it's hard to separate it. I think of myself as a servant. So the very first thing I say to people, I write to serve. Then I say I write to inspire, to elevate, to awaken, and the term I like to use quite a lot, to reach the heart. I'm not speaking of what women talk about, a broken heart. They're speaking about the emotions, broken heart.
Right.
I'm speaking of something deeper within us. We all have it, but people use the words in terms of human relationships quite a lot. So because it takes me back to the standpoint that we are all souls. And loosely speaking, if you're looking at the human psyche in the West, in Christianity, we speak of body and soul, but in the East, in some traditions, they speak of the soul, the heart, the mind, what we call the emotions, and the physical. Just different ways of saying the same thing, but it's a more detailed path. And I lost track of what I was going to say now. Yes, was I talking about service?
Yeah, we were talking about
Reaching the
service
heart, reaching the heart. So I try to reach the heart because we are all souls. Everyone has a heart, and if you can reach the heart, some people feel it 6 years later, 7 years later, 10 years later. I've got a guy I used to a host. I would go to every evening. He said absolutely nothing about my poetry. But 4 years later, one guy came up and he did something so bad, so bad. Yeah, it's a terrible poem. The whole group felt it and it changed the energy of the place. And he paused for, that's the host paused for a moment. And then he says, I think I'll bring on someone with a more peaceful vibes. You don't expect him to say that. And then he called me, and then I realized sometimes even when people don't talk about your poetry, somehow it's having an effect on them.
yeah.
And he called me, and I did a piece which he really loved. So you never know what effect you're having on humans. And people stop me coming from the toilet, from a venue, or in the corridor, maybe buying a drink or something, just to tell me. It's usually 3 or 4 out of 40 people. But what these 3 or 4 people say is incredibly meaningful. So we're touching hearts, we're touching hearts.
Yeah, I was thinking when I mentioned it, try to put spirituality aside. I was thinking of the Bodhisattva vow, where we say we will not sit and enjoy enlightenment until we help bring more people along the path.
Yes,
Yeah. All right. So
yes,
now let me ask you
yes,
this: um,
yes,
because you are consciously a servant, consciously a person who brings
yes.
philosophy and higher consciousness to bear in your work. Do you feel a responsibility as that entity, as that kind of a being, that when you come to a poetry gathering or any gathering, you want to bring that spirituality, whether openly or subtly, to the group?
It's essential, but sometimes I bring it in a subtle way. I did this poem in social justice yesterday, and you were there. It's called "The Butterfly Keeps on Flying." I think you heard that very first piece. It's a very subtle poem, and subtle poems I don't like mentioning names. I try to be balanced, and I try to take it upon myself. It's like I put it like my own experience, but there is a message in that subtlety. There's a message there. I'm trying to elevate humans to see things with a new light. And away from spirituality, if you like, you're talking about, I can see it happening now. So many countries are saying things they would not have dreamt of saying. So, in a sense, the pestilences, what I call pestilences, COVID or the Great Depression or whatever they are, or even wars, they have their uses in changing our consciousness. We call it transformation, not so much change, but they transform our consciousness. And people are even more aware. Guruji used to say, always an optimist. And I think like that too. I'm always an optimist. And I feel that we're growing and we might be growing in a spiral. We're not moving straight towards Rick. We might just take a slight detour, and things seem to be bad for a moment and the residues kick in and perhaps they have a bad odor, a bad color or something, but sooner or later it changes and we move forward again. So we're not, because that's the nature of evolution. Evolution doesn't really go back, it's moving forward. And God is in motion. Therefore, this is something I learned in Sri Chinmoy's path. I mean, I saw God as, a man with a long beard, maybe a bit longer than yours, in a geographical place called heaven, until I learned the philosophy of self-transcendence and I began to think of consciousness and spirit with a capital S. Then I saw the whole thing has been in motion all the time and very different to what I learned in Christianity.
Um, you know, many of us uh, hear from our colleagues, that our words touch them, that our words help to transform them. Um, since you're a person who's worked hard and studied to make yourself the best lantern carrier you can be, um, do you feel a certain responsibility to help our colleagues to kind of raise their energy a little bit. I'm sure from what I hear you read, you're working always to try to share that higher
Yes,
vibration.
much. Practically all of my writings are for that purpose, except that Trichinwa himself uses the word serve. From his standpoint, humanity is our brothers and sisters. He basically says we can't help anyone. And again, this thing about free will, that doesn't apply to Sri Chinmoy's teachings. He says God is always in charge. What we have is what he calls limited freedom. Ramakrishna said that, Papa Ramdas said that. It's all about grace and self-effort working in harmony. But you would come to the point where you begin to realize that even that self-effort itself is an act of grace. That's how they see it from the higher level. The higher you go, the more you see that you're like a cow tied to a very long rope. You don't know that there is a long rope. You don't know that you're tied. And you're grazing freely, seemingly, until suddenly you realize you're tied, and it is like that. So I like to use the word serve, but yes, I'm doing essentially that. And sometimes I take it upon myself to avoid the word you. Many poets do that because it comes over like preaching. I want to come over as a servant, So I feel that I'm having the despair. I am having the loneliness. Because all souls have it at some point in their lives, including me, but I may not necessarily be having it when I'm writing, but I know someone else who is experiencing that difficulty. So I'm trying to shine a light on it to lift them up, But again, even then, one needs to be careful. Guruji used to say, try not to change the world. You will fail. Try to love the world. Lo, the world is change forever. So the approach shouldn't be one of changing the world. The approach should be one of loving the world. That is taken from one of Guruji's aphorisms. Yeah, to love and not to change. Yeah.
I had a wonderful experience myself with Ram Dass. I had used his book in my teaching. I had not embraced the idea of being a teacher at all. I said I'm a researcher. I'm a student. I'm not a teacher. I didn't want to take on that karma, that responsibility. I felt that if I stayed as a researcher without doing any teaching, I could. It was an easier path. But I kept hearing the cue words that I was going to teach. Well, at one point, after I accepted that I was going to share some of my spiritual learning, Ram Dass was coming to Miami, where I was living. Yes. And since I had used his book, Be Here Now, extensively in my teaching, I told my friends, my students, please, let's go see Ram Dass. It's going to be marvelous. You don't get that kind of opportunity very often. And so as soon as I heard, I went to the local bookstore to get tickets. They said, no, we sold out in 1 hour when the tickets arrived. So, but we have heard that there'll be tickets sold that day because not everyone's going to hear, in time. So I said, well, look, the lecture is at 1 o'clock. Let's be down there at 9 a.m. and we will be the first in line. So whatever tickets are available, we'll get those tickets. So we went down there, and characteristically, Miami, this is in downtown urban Miami. There's a wonderful Universal Life Church there. So we're sitting outside, and I said, let's chant Om. Let's build up an energy field. Let's create that energy that's going to be so wonderful, right? So we're chanting Om. We started right at 9, and we chanted and chanted and chanted. Finally, the people start arriving. It's maybe noon and 1, and we had when the gate finally opened, we went over to the ticket booth, and they said, we wanted to save some tickets, but it didn't happen. Really sorry, too bad. And some of my students are like, oh, Rick, you told us. I said, look, I suggested this might be a path. If you want to blame me, it's okay. But, we let us continue to chant Om. Let's continue to build this energy. Miracles happen every day. So Sure enough, they open the doors. Everybody files in. We're still out there chanting Om. Now, my group of 12 that originally came dwindled down to about 5, right? We're still chanting Om. Well, son of a gun, walking down the street, coming toward the chapel, is a tall figure in saffron robes, right? It's Ram Dass. He comes up, he stands next to us, joins us in
Wow.
the chanting, and we're you can imagine our hearts are just ringing, right? So he says, "Well, listen, this is wonderful." He said, "I've been greeted a lot of wonderful ways, and this is really nice. Thank you. Let's go in." And I said, "Sir, as much as we would like to, they tell us there's no room." He said, wait, let me see what I can do." So he walks in. A few minutes later, he walks out, and the person in charge of the hall is shaking his head. No, no, I'm really sorry. There's nothing we can do. And Ram Dass looks at us and says, "You know what? I've got an idea. Come with me." So we sat with him on the stage for the satsang.
Wow. What a blessing. What a blessing.
It
You
was,
know, he was one of America's top 10 famous men. I mean, his contribution to the world is phenomenal. The funny thing is that I wasn't talking about him. I was talking with Papa Ramdas, the Indian lady,
oh,
who had a disciple called Krishna Bai, and she wrote a
ah,
book called Guru's Grace, which is phenomenal. But this Ramdas I also know because he was known all over the world and he helped so many people. He
yeah,
inspired, which is a better word, so many humans. So many
yeah.
humans, yes.
It was a
Yes.
real honor. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about that. Um, Let me ask you one final question about your spiritual path, brother.
Yes.
Um, for people out there who, should we say, are a little shy, uh,
Mhm.
are impressed by your presence, your energy, but are hesitant to ask, what books, what reading, what do you suggest that people might go to learn a little something about this without, if you will, the pressure of talking with you about it? What books do you recommend, brother?
Sometimes I know the individuals, and if they're Christian based, I would recommend At the Feet of the Master by Guru Sundar Singh or The Imitation of Christ by Thomas A. Kempis. And there's another one I really love by Brother Lawrence. It's called The Practice of the Presence of God. So,
Mm.
and they're all little books and they're very cheap. So beautiful. The Practice of the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. At the Feet of the Master, which is even smaller, by Sadhu Sundar Singh. Christ-based books, phenomenal. And what did I call the third one? Imitation of Christ by Thomas A. Kempis. If we were talking about books by my master, my book, um, it's condensed. It's called My Guru Sri Chinmoy, Life and Teachings, 223 pages. Difficult to write because it's full of quotations from Sri Chinmoy himself. I've selected passages. So like chapters 10 to 14 is all about the spiritual life, deep spirituality. I often tell people there's a difference between motivation, life coaches, and inspirational teachers. They're very good and they help us. But a spiritual book is much deeper. There are people who wouldn't dream of reading spiritual books, but they would love books like Ian Lavans and what's it called? Uh, those motivational books. They tell you how to succeed in life, and they're very positive and finding wealth and finding a woman or finding a wife, or finding things. But the spiritual books point you to God, to your true nature, and they read differently. So my book, my Guru Sri Chinmoy, Life and Teachings, and there's one called Meditation, just Meditation, I think it's called, which is very, very good. And then there's another one called Yoga and the Spiritual Life. These are like beginners books, Yoga and the Spiritual Life, or Meditation, the series of questions and answers and meditation. But Guru doesn't write about it, which are talking about God. God is literally all his 1,600 books. And so you get the feeling straight away that, it's a different kind of teaching you're getting. And I mean, outside of my own master, Ramakrishna, a book that helped people quite a lot, written by Christopher Isherwood. It's called My Guru and His Disciple. And then Ananda Mahima, the writings of Ananda Mahima. And Who Am I by Ramana Maharshi. Yeah, Who Am I, Ramana Maharshi.
Well,
Yeah.
here I am talking with a revered student, let's say a servant.
Yes.
Let's talk about your books. My goodness, brother. We've gone this far. We haven't talked about your books. What books
I've
are
got nearly 3,000 poems just sitting there. For whatever reason, I get more urge to write than to print. But my first book was called 40 Roses to My Lord Supreme. It was a poetry book written like 15 years ago, and 40 poems, all devoted to Sri Chinmoy. It's a very devotional book of poems. And I have one on that which I used recently. It's called Ode to the Divine Mother. It was Mother Sunday and Mother's Week and Women's this and that, whatever it was. So I read one of that. My second book is 223 pages. It's a fully spiritual book. It was written about 12 years ago. It's called My Guru Sri Chinmoy Life and Teachings. It should be available on Amazon still, being sold by a publisher from Nepal. It should be about £13, but I've seen it at so many crazy prices. I don't have any connection with the book. He gave me 120 something books, which I'm grateful for, and they're all sold. And he controls everything else. I was learning about contracts. I know much more about contracts now than I knew then.
I know that
Yeah.
is.
And the
Okay.
last book I sold out of, it's a poetry book called Blossoms of the Heart. That's the one that Mircea Prada did. It's like about 150 pages, mostly of sonnets. I have a lot of Shakespearean sonnets in that one, and structured sonnets, and I have a lot of freestyle. I prefer writing in freestyle because I can bring in more images and be more creative. They're 14-liners, but they're freestyle. And then I have odes. So that book doesn't include my longer poems at all, but I will bring out one soon called Whispering Praises to Love, which is an infinitely more beautiful book. And I have a book which was nearly finished about 10 years, 10 years ago, and it's still sitting there. It's called Maxims for Our Children, a look at the teachings of Jesus the Christ. So it takes biblical work and breaks it down. A book like, it's very much like one of Sri Ramakrishna's disciples wrote a book called The Sermon on the Mount, according to Vedanta. And he just broke down the Sermon on the Mount and he made it very simple. My book is like that, but it's not using only the Sermon on the Mount. It's using, every time Christ speaks, it's using the gospel to simplify it. And there are two children interacting constantly in my book because it's written for kids. So when there's something they don't understand, they speak to dad. Dad is the prophet, and dad is answering and he's simplifying it for them.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, I think it's time that we hear some work by the illustrious Lantern Fairy. So if you could break out some of your writing.
I'm in Germany and I left all my work, most of my work behind, but I knew I'd be doing some Zoom. So I took some, what I would call performance ones. Okay. And they're all longer, but I managed to find a few short ones. But the first one I wanted to do is the only one I have with me, which is like that. It comes from those I call mundane poems. What I do, I take an aspect of life, of people's struggles. In this case, it's work. You know, people talking about work and the struggles with work. Many, like me, love their work, but there are some who struggle with work, and Monday is a difficulty, and Friday is a difficulty. They want to get away. So this one is basically describing the struggles of work. Although I have 3 or 4 poems about work itself, which expresses the joy. This one goes through the struggles, but I have a way of using words which is different. It's called Dusk's waning luster fades into the night. Normally, the awakened dawn guides my steps, and I march forward boldly, knowing that my shadows would not put me in chains too quickly. Yet today, the previous night's fatigue is still alive in my tiresome physique. Morn catches me apprehensive, and even as daybreak heralds the inner and outer noises of Friday's toil, I can only remain sullen as I walk slowly out of the house, preparing my pretentious smile. It is the end of the week, and after 5 days, the daily grind in a loveless environment is all too much for me. Starved by anxieties and despair, like a sharp machete, I entreat the sunset to roll on forward from the horizon. I nurture the heavy elephants in my emotions as I head towards the dusk, even as the waning luster fades into the night.
Lovely.
And that's a freestyle sonnet, free verse.
Very nice. Very nice.
So it's describing work and the difficulties of work, and you're dying to get home.
Absolutely.
Oh, the next
Please
one
read
was,
another, sir.
yeah, it's a prompt given by Prasanna, I think. It's called "We Rise by Lifting Others." Earth speaks of my holiness like prayers, concealed within the agony of my heart's longing for happiness. Bluebirds partake in this heavenly romance, even as they chirp in distant foliage amidst the silent glimmer of dawn. Within a pervading stillness, a vista of cascading rose-pink leaves elevates my receptive soul. If one can escape the chatter of unruly emotions, love will fill the silence with 1,000 worth of glories. Like vermilion roses, we rise by lifting others, affect Mother Gaia by the vibrations that we offer to the world. Magnolias offered with sincere intentions will only unfurl beauty, even as the parched earth grows green, grateful for the blessings of torrential rain. Where there is love in the soil, there will be radiance in the flowers. If there's fuel in the wood, it will ignite with flames of light. Gray skies devoid of the sun are not going to provide warmth, neither will a dark night glisten, lamenting the loss of a waning moon. Oh, love, I have become so full of worldliness that my untamed mind converses with 1,000 thoughts, seldom listens to the dictates of the inner synagogue. I entreat you to elevate my heart so that, like an iridescence of stars, I will inspire humanity even in our darkest nights.
Bravo,
Let me
sir.
say I use nature quite a lot. It's one of the 6 or 7 words I use in poetry. In this case, I use a lot of flowers. The flowers and nature are very kind of a unique tool that I use. I create so much from nature.
Lovely work, sir. Lovely work. Please read another, sir.
Okay. So I write my spiritual works, particularly if they relate to love, in a human way. I learned that from Rumi. So sometimes I avoid the word God and heaven and things like that, but I break it down into the everyday language. This one is called "No One Else Will Ever Matter to Me." Birds sing harmoniously in the breaking dawn, and the kiss of joy within is precious. Sunrise shimmers on a brightly lit daybreak as my soul dances, bewitched by the brilliance of its luster. Light zephyrs waltz a soft melody, playing the hauntingly eloquent strings of Mozart like a regal symphony. My heart drinks from a plethora of happiness, wooing my spirit with its magic. I have no home, and my heart roams with the saffron-colored robes of the sannyasin, not the outer garments, but the seeds of dispassion, the golden raiment of an intense longing for my sweetest Shyama. Without you, my queen, Grief swallows my gaze with its veil, leaving me fallen in despair, a shipwrecked vessel, awaiting rescue tankers to take me home. With you beside me, I feel a quintessence of love, transforming the cobwebs within. Every moment of your absence creates endless agony, and my arteries feel narrow with oxygen impeded to the cells. Now you've merged, now we've merged like strands to the sitar, and your harmonies make all else seem meaningless. Gone are the imprints of memories when remorse and sorrow kept me company. Now we stroll along in Dillsburg, high above sunsets and horizons. Here the magenta leaves kiss the earth each autumn like old friends, happy like you and I, to blend with each other in synergy. Only you, my love, can satiate the agony of my longing. This dependency on goodness that merges pain, faith, and beauty together. Only you, my empress, for as long as you remain inside my heart, no one else will ever matter to me. So it's a longing between me and the beloved, which is the absolute. But I put it in human, I cloak it as much as I can in human form.
Lovely. May I offer you one, brother?
Sure, certainly, sure.
I think it's only fair when I'm asking you to tell me these wonderful poems of yours that I at least offer one in
Some of your
response.
poetry is like flowing and eloquent and soft and sweet. And that last one you did recently, so nice, so nice.
Thank you, brother. Thank you so much. I had been involved in a peace group. We were
Uh-huh.
forming a coalition to speak out against the war in Iraq, and things were going
Mhm.
generally very well. We had all kinds of different groups, different religious groups, philosophical groups, different cultural organizations, but sadly, there kept being friction between one of our Jewish groups and one of our Palestinian groups. And it
Right.
was getting so common, so regular, that it was really disrupting the meeting. So I said, what I'd like to do is I'd like to sponsor a conference from among our groups. And I said, I would like to set aside one meeting to not do nothing but talk with our Palestinian brothers and our Jewish brothers and sisters so that we all can kind of work through and come to a common understanding so that we're not disrupting the peace meeting. And people agreed. I said, I only ask you one thing. I ask you to listen twice as much as talk. And I ask you to also sign a paper that you will give as much respect as you deserve.
Yes.
And they did. They came, they signed, right? And I'm feeling really positive. We had a marvelous meeting. Everything went as good as you could ever hope, right? And as we're
Wow.
leaving, and I'm feeling so good, this one young Arab gentleman came over to me and he said, well, I guess obviously you're a Jew. And I went, so I wrote a response to that. This is called, I thought you were a Jew. So here it goes. I'm a Jew. I'm a Buddhist. I'm a pagan. And what's truest, I'm a Christian and an animist, sometimes a philatelist, a Tibetan and a Hindu. And no matter what you do, I think I like what you do. God, I think she's very open minded. I'm reminded when St. John's at stake, I'm calling Blake. And when Luther calls, I'm an Eskimo too. I think that's the least I can do. And wear a ghost shirt to my baptism when Martin causes a schism. I'm a Muslim and a Druid. My position's rather fluid. I'm a Sikh and a Taoist. Of that, I think I'm proudest. A capitalist and a pinko. Well, at least sometimes I think so. Sometimes I'm agnostic, a Rastafarian Coptic, a Methodist, contrarian, or even a librarian, a sectarian, Siberian who often turns to Mecca while counting the Kabbalah to get him to Shambhala, a Catholic Baptist evangelist, a Dunker agrarian fundamentalist, a 7-day adventurist, a Scientologist apologist, juggling snakes with the Lady of the Lakes, And when praying aloud at Delphi, a Mithraic tantric yogi, a Jasmine playing boogie. At least a close insight to God, at least that's what we thought, a Confucian and a Shinto, it seems that's what I'm into, a Calvinist and a Navajo with a nodding wink to Xanadu, a Cherokee, a Schwabian, Swinburgian, Zoroastrian Hussite, a Theosophist and a Thelemite, spearing celestial spiritual dynamite.
It's a good answer. It's a good answer. Guruji used to say, I'm a student of love. He said,
I wanted to
I'm
try
a
to.
God seeker, I'm a student of love.
Yeah, I just wanted to tie as many of the religions together as I could.
Yeah, because sometimes you have to be wise, you have to be clever, because people try to pin you down to, a particular thing, and your heart could be as universal as. That's why Socrates said, "I'm neither Greek nor Athenian. I'm a citizen of the world," because people they're always trying to pin you down.
Now I know what box you're in. Okay. Sir, would you read some more?
Okay.
And feel free to read a long one. It's perfectly fine.
Okay, so I would read you a classic. Why don't you choose for me? I have Namaste. I have The Agony of Loving, which is more detailed. I have Be a Lamp unto Others. And I have Evolution and Growth, which is the longest.
Read the one that you read the least. Feel free.
Okay. The one I read the least was written very recently. It was done at Open Minds and Unmesh. It was written on the 6th of April. The Agony of Longing. My heart prostrated daily in your meadow of love, waiting for you, my sweetheart. The flowers in their harmonious oneness with my longing had created a gateway of magical garlands so I could peep through. The sad chords of a lamenting agony played the lute in my soul. Nurturing my patience was not without trials, and the pain within was more difficult than that without. Yet I knew your ability to elevate my spirit was beyond sublime, and I waited, not expecting anything from you but love itself. I am a rolling stream flowing towards the ocean in search of my beloved. I pick up beautiful crystals along the way to enhance my glow. Only in your presence can my breath flow freely, and without you, I'm beside myself with yearning. My soul gleams with the utmost clarity, but sometimes in the agony of my despair, the inner passions become confused, and I dare not brood over the prospect of losing you. May the light that brought us here remains even after the moon wanes and the stars repose from their dazzling dancing through the night. You are the embodiment of my dreams, and even in an arid desert, I know that you'll wait in an oasis of living water to quench my thirst. With every breath and action of mine, I have lived this life with an agony of intensity, hoping always to see thy cute cheeks. Thankfully, destiny brought us back together, reignited my ancient longing, revived by a firm and unyielding faith in the miraculous. You are the sun, and I am your horizon. You are my lover, and I am your flower, blending into the reflections of each other's luminance. I need to look at you endlessly, hoping that the word parting will never come into existence. I wish to embrace you at every moment, to kiss and be kissed by you, an enchanting thrill running through me, like my life's blood, feeding me with oxygen, the pranic life force that it is. I once lived in a sea of golden rain, basking in the ocean of my own light. Now that I can recall this sweetness, I have no desire to lose you again. You are my meadow of truth, blue for immensity and vastness, red for the very splendid vista of roses unfurling whenever you call my name. My loneliness was boundless, and my skin dripped with the tears of an inner hunger for a glance of thy gaze. Now the stains of my sorrows have dissipated, and the rages of doubt that once had me wandering from dawn to dusk have vanished. You've accepted me with my ocean of shadows, offering me your all with the bewilderment of thy kiss. My luster of beauty has been rekindled, even though the physical disfigured by a mirror of scars. Now I ascend, not like Icarus who flew too close to the sun, but the soaring phoenix immortal in the sweet realm of the unknowable. Lantern Carrier.
Beautiful. Beautiful, brother. Beautiful. Wow.
This one's called The Agony of Longing.
Very nice. Very nice. Well, sir, we have time for one more, if you'd like.
Right, let's see what I'll do. Why don't I do a namaste? Oh no, let's do the motivational. Be a lamp unto others. Be a lamp unto others, for it is only through light that we may learn to embrace the darkness. Each soul has its own struggles, and its thoughts turn largely upon itself. Yet I must not look down on others, as the flame in me is the same spark yearning in another soul for freedom. Instead, let me make myself a bridge so that weary souls can cross over the chasm which is lurking beneath, doing this in silence, for just as an unripe fruit may not taste like sweet mangoes, so too each soul must experience its own thorns. Let me not be too bothered by the fire of desires, for love sets my challenges in each cycle, and unworthiness can be a red thread bleeding in the stranglehold of remorse and shame. Yet treasures are hidden in adversities, just as love holds me even with turbulent emotions like waves. Each ray of light is unique, a river of consciousness, and one which will always have something to offer to life. For when it is short of logs for fire, it will offer weeds as minerals, even as it feeds me fishes from the fisherman's net. I must never forget that water, however murky, will always be abundant. When my daily grind seems heavy, or I am hurt by the sharp blades of jealousy and backbiting, let me drop to my knees, cupping my hands in salat, remembering that prayer is an entreaty to the voice within, already manifest in my sorrows. It only waits for me to accept my helplessness, give up my grip on self-reliance. For love is a redeeming power, transforming my inner ugliness to an immaculate beauty and splendor without. I am not in charge, simply a conduit or vessel that love uses to glorify itself. And by being a lamp unto others, I create a vibration which will not only inspire my happiness, but enhances the joy and beauty of love's creation of Mother Earth. Be brave, O lantern carrier. You are an inner warrior, a flicker constantly striving to become a flame, to tie your hopes and dreams on the ascent of phoenixes. Soaring the perennials on a cauldron of blaze, you bondage rows of ignorance, carving a golden path so as to return to the light of the beyond. Listen, not with a dissecting mind, but to that sweet voice within that speaks in silence, either in shadows paved with loneliness or the unfurling pink tulips of seasonal spring.
Bravo, sir. Bravo. Thank you so much, my friend. It's such an
I
honor to have
thank you. I thank you. You and I, giving and receiving. I think of the maestro and the orchestra or the garden of flowers. You know, there's roses and tulips and orchids and hydrangeas, each with a different scent, but each playing a role in the harmony of the garden, like the flute and the piano, and everything else. And the maestro himself, he gets joy from the audience and by their claps and their applause, and they get joy from the maestro because of his expertise, and the instruments all blend in this harmonious union. And this is what we need on earth, I guess, you know, the harmony and oneness.
very lovely, my brother, lovely. Let me ask you
Yeah,
one final question, if I may.
yes,
Um,
certainly.
I always ask my poets to answer this question. When a young person comes up to you and says, you know, I think I'm a poet, I feel like I'm a poet, is it something that I should work on, or is it something that's a waste of time? What do you say someone who's wondering about the power of poetry?
Well, nothing is a waste of time. Souls are unique, and poetry is the voice of the soul, or the dance of the soul, because we souls expressing itself in myriad ways, in a diversity of ways. Diversity is necessary to life, according to the growth or development of each seeker, because we are at different stages of the ladder of evolution. So Blake might be on ladder number 15, and Keats might be on ladder number 10. But what Keats is sharing at ladder number 10 is as equally important to him as what Blake is sharing on rung, not ladder, on rung number 15. And the kindergarten child, she likes the ABCs and singing the alphabet in large letters. And that's very significant to her as academics is to the scholar. You see, so it's like there's nothing. I always say there is only spirit. There's nothing outside of spirit, and anything that comes within spirit has a purpose. If it's created by spirit, it has a purpose. There's nothing within spirit that does not has a purpose. We say that Lucifer came from God, don't we? So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Thank you so
so
much for your time, my friend. A
thank
great
you,
honor to
thank
have you
you.
here.
Thank
Namaste.
you. Let me just say that evil is the lesser form of light. Evil is the lesser form of light. And
Thank
Rumi
you.
says both light and shadows are the dance of love. That's Rumi.
Thank you, my brother.
Thank you. Thank you.
You have a wonderful evening. Bye bye.
Thank you, Rick. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. My heart's love.
Thank you, sir.